Hey guys, I'm Alex.
And I'm Amber. Welcome back to the second season of True Crime and Chill.
Welcome back, chillers. I know that I can speak for both Amber and myself when I say that we are so excited to be embarking on our second season of True Crime and Chill right now.
We sure are. And we are so thankful for any new listeners that we have picked up since ending season 1, as well as all of the helpful feedback that we've received to make the show even better for you.
And
We
not
have
so
surpassed...
helpful.
What?
And not so helpful.
Oh my gosh. Well, it is what it is, the internet. We have surpassed over 5,000 downloads. And it makes me so happy, you guys. Thank you.
Dude, no, it really does. It makes both of us really happy. So I'm super stoked. And this week's case is actually one that I heard over the break. And because it does tie into Halloween a little bit, I do figure it would be the perfect one to kick the show off with.
Well, let's get to it.
All right, so our story starts in Oil City, Pennsylvania on October 27th, 1992. 11-year-old Shauna Howe was actually getting ready for a Halloween party that was being put on by her Girl Scout troop. Now, from what I could find, in different articles, and the cold case special that I watched on the case, Shauna loved Halloween. Like, she loved dressing up, she loved trick-or-treating, she loved the decorations, everything about it.
And I don't blame her, because Halloween's kind of awesome.
It really is. Like, it's my favorite holiday as well. Like, honestly, I can see my boys are already starting to be like spooky boys, so it's really cool. So it's nice. So that year, Shauna's mother, Lucy, said that Shauna actually wanted to be a gymnast. So she had this cute, like, little leotard with her tights and stuff and her gloves on her hands. And she had, like, this cute little page boy haircut. And she was just super excited. And she was just, like, dancing around the house and jumping off stairs and just, being an 11-year-old girl who was just super excited about her Halloween costume and stuff like that. She was super excited to go to the Halloween party. And when she left that day, she kissed her mom, told her that she loved her, and head out the door. Shauna had arrived at the party and everything was pretty normal, when police later talked to parents of her friends and stuff, they said that, everything seemed normal. Shauna didn't seem like she was scared or anything or threatened. The meeting eventually ended around 7:38, and Shauna had decided to actually walk home with some friends who were going in the same direction as her. Again, not totally uncommon in the early 90s. I know that I was born in 92, so and I know that as I was growing up, this totally wasn't uncommon to let your 11-year-old kid walk home by themselves. And it was only a few blocks. Lucy had actually said that she wasn't there to pick her up just because she had forgot what time it ended. And I believe that she was actually at work. Again, not uncommon. And honestly, everyone knew everybody in that town. So it was no surprise that Shauna actually felt comfortable walking home that night. Right. About a block away from her house, Shauna's friends veered off one way and Shauna had to continue going straight. One of her good friends actually told her they could walk with her the last block and a half, but she had declined, saying that it would be okay.
I mean, it's understandable. Her house was so close, she probably figured nothing bad was going to happen.
Exactly. However, around 8:30 p.m., her stepfather, John, got worried when Shauna still wasn't home yet. He called Lucy and mentioned it, and she said that it was odd that Shauna wasn't home, but maybe the meeting ran late and that she was on her way home. Eventually, 9:30 rolled around and she still wasn't home. So Lucy started getting worried and eventually decided to come home from work and look for her. She also had John call around to local hospitals and friends' houses. All came back with the same answer. Shauna was not there. By the time Lucy got home, both she and John had decided to call 911. It was almost like Shauna had just vanished into thin air. Police showed up to the house pretty quickly. As they were taking statements from the parents and going over all the places they had looked, a report came over the radio that had stopped Lucy and John's world. They were sitting in the kitchen. From what I got from the episode of Cold Case Files, they were actually just sitting in the kitchen talking to the police. The police had the radios on them and everything. Something had come over the radio that somebody had reported a kidnapping that had actually taken place at the cross section of West First and Reed Street that was right down the road from Shauna's house. And it was around the same time that she would have been going home. Lucy said in a later interview, "That's how we figured out what happened to my daughter."
Just the poor mother. You already feel like something's terribly wrong. And then to hear it like that, it's so sad.
Yeah, you automatically think, oh my God. You don't want to automatically think, oh my God, my child is dead. But then, it's really hard not to think that, when everything is going on, and then you finally like get this call, and it just shatters everything. So the police ended up going out in droves that night. They spoke to a witness, Dan Payton, who was actually the one who called the kidnapping in. He said that he was out that night. I think he was walking his dog. I'm not sure. I could not find any evidence to back that up, or he was just out for a walk that night. He had noticed Shauna on the other side of the street, walking down the street in the opposite direction of him. When he had turned to continue walking, he actually noticed a tall, thin man in a baseball cap following her. That was when he realized that something was going on, because he heard her scream, and he turned and he saw the man grab the little girl, a red car come up. The man passed the girl off to somebody in the car, and the car just sped off. Now, this was a time before cell phones, so it's not like he could just whip out a cell phone and dial 911 right there. He had to end up actually running to different people's houses before somebody actually opened up the door and let them use their landline so he can call 911. So it probably took about 10-15 minutes after the kidnapping for him to actually find a phone to be able to call. Law enforcement officers ended up spending most of the night searching and actually setting up roadblocks, stopping every car and asking if they'd see anything that resembled a small red car. They would stop and search. They knew how important this was. The likelihood of finding a kidnapped child after 24 hours is very low.
Yeah. I mean, you have cases like J.C. Dugard or Elizabeth Smart, but those are in the very few percent.
Oh, yeah. So at this point, the police are on a clock and they were losing time. Lucy obviously wanted to go out and look for her daughter, but the police basically said, no, stay home in case it was a kidnapping for a ransom.
But also because they probably didn't want her to find a body if there was one.
Yep. And that was my thing too, is because like what police officer would want the parent to find the body of the child that they're missing? So the search continued all night and into the next morning. Lucy said in an interview later that she had woken up and that there were people gathered on her front lawn. Some people she knew, some people she didn't, but all of them had the same end goal: to find Shauna. In one of the interviews, she did say that she kind of said, she's like, have you ever seen a caged tiger in a zoo where they pace back and forth? That's how I felt. And I was just screaming at somebody to let me out, but they didn't. And honestly, I thought that was actually a really good description of parents who are in the situation, because it's like, they feel like they can't really do anything, and all they're doing is pacing back and forth, waiting for news that might never come.
Sure. But there's also, I could also see them not wanting her to get involved, because when your emotions run high like that,
Yep.
you're just not effective. So she could, like, if she was in charge of an area and there wasn't somebody with her, she could miss something.
Yep.
I also feel like, then she would find everything too. And her, that constant, like, I can't imagine that, like, up and down, like every little thing might be my daughter. So I could completely understand them wanting to say, I just don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah. So on October 29th, 2 days after Shauna went missing, the police got a call. Someone had actually found a girl's bodysuit in Coulter's Hole, a hunting and fishing area that was, it was about a few miles away from Shauna's house. It's a really secluded place that people would go when they would want to go hunting or do something that they really just didn't want to be caught doing. Think of Six Pack in Port Angeles. Like, it's kind of like that, like the secluded area. It takes a bit to get to. People go up there to hunt and stuff like that. They actually ended up calling John and asking him to come out and identify the bodysuit, mainly because they wanted to make sure, is this Shauna's or is this someone else's? And so when he came out, he looked at it and he said, yeah, it was Shauna's. And it was then that the police actually realized that it had been overnight, because you could see the condensation that accumulated on it overnight. The police had taken the bodysuit and sent it to a lab out of town to get tested, and found that there were actually seminal deposits on it. Usually when that happens, it means she had been raped and or molested while wearing the suit. And though the police know what that meant, it also meant that they have the DNA of the person who did this.
I imagine it was really hard for them to be hopeful about the DNA evidence because of how they found it.
Yeah, and it really was. I imagine they were thankful that they had something to test against potential suspects. But I know that I was thinking, why didn't they just test the DNA against DNA they had in the system? They may have found her killer earlier. It was then I realized that they didn't have a database for that.
Well, right.
Yeah, so it wasn't until 1987, actually, that Tommy Lee Andrews was the first American actually convicted with DNA evidence in a burglary and rape that he had done. It was then that the country had realized, the power of DNA in court, and motions had started going into place to implement some kind of databases for violent offenders. But even then, the database wasn't put into effect until the late 90s after Shauna's death. So all the police had at this point was just some DNA from seminal deposits, and that was it, though they really just never gave up looking for Shauna. Sadly, on October 30th, Bill Crabtree was a hunter going back to a hunting site that he had been at previously. Walking across a trestle bridge that was in Coulter's Hole, he looked down and saw the body of a little girl. Going back to town, he had called the police and led them straight to her body. Shauna had not been there the day before, as they had searched every inch of that area, and she was found a little bit away from where her bodysuit was found, completely naked. As investigators combed the area, the coroner looked over her body. They then found that Shauna was actually alive when she hit the ground. Whoever had taken her had pushed her from the bridge, where she died from blunt force trauma associated with a 33-foot fall. They actually speculated that she'd been alive for about 5 to 10 minutes after she hit the ground.
That's so terrible. Like, how could someone do that to a child?
I have no clue. And you know me, I look over these cases daily. So I've seen some things. But I have no clue. I've read stories about cases that stick with detectives and reporters, and honestly, I think this was a huge one that stuck with a lot of them around Oil City. Charles Daly was actually the original detective on the case. He had said that something they noticed was the fact that her shoes were up on top of the bridge, neatly placed. Like they didn't look like they had been kicked off, or they didn't look like she had fallen out of them or anything. Like they looked like whoever had killed Shauna had put them down like neatly, and there was candy wrappers all around it, like crumpled up and littered all around it. It was almost as if the killer was telling them they were so close to finding her alive, but they just missed the mark. And as far as I know, that was all that was found at the crime scene. There was also other physical injuries to her body. Her knees were scuffed and scraped, and there were bruises all over her body.
I imagine they were reluctant to tell Lucy.
They were. Lucy's brother actually ended up coming to tell her, and he was the one who actually identified Shauna's body as well. And John said that he remembered the scream that came from her. It was the scream of a mother losing her child. Because of Shauna's death, the town basically canceled Halloween that year. Parents kept a close eye on their children. There was a curfew implemented. Even years after that, trick-or-treating was moved to daylight hours. Curfews were set up on Halloween, on the days leading up to Halloween. The police were determined to find Shauna's killer. They had DNA. They just needed the person to match it to. So, fun fact, or not so fun fact. So, crime fact. Okay, I'm going to start saying that. Crime fact. So, crime fact. When children go missing, it is very rarely ever a stranger abduction. So, according to research and the Polyclass Foundation website, which Polyclass is actually another case that we're probably going to be doing, out of all child abductions that happen in the U.S., 3% are actually related to non-custodial issues. So, most of the child abductions that happen in the U.S. are usually parents that are fighting over custody issues. 3% of those are non-custodial issues, meaning those are the ones that are taken for the offender's preference of rape, molestation, and or killing them. Out of those 3%, less than 100 or less than 1% are actually stranger abductions. So that means most of those abductions are actually done by somebody that they know or that is part of the family.
Yeah. Hence why the police look so hard at the families and the friends around the child when they first go missing.
Exactly. Once they can start to eliminate that inner circle, they can start looking at everybody outside of it. And that's what the police did. The day after Shauna was found, they went back to her house and took DNA samples from her stepfather, her uncles, and even her brother. Lucy at first didn't want her son to have to give his blood for DNA because that's what they did back then, is they took blood samples instead of swabs. But at once, because she knew that her kid didn't do anything. She was like, "This is my kid. This is her brother. Like he didn't do anything." But once it was explained to her why they were doing it, and he actually said, "Mom, it's okay. Let me do this. It's okay." Then she let him. Obviously, none of them came back a match. So they started looking to everybody outside the family. The fathers of the girls in her Girl Scout troop, people at her school, people that her parents knew from work, people that her brother knew, people that her uncles knew. But after collecting more than 100 DNA samples in that time frame, and then there were hundreds more that they collected in the 13 years before they actually solved Shauna's case, nothing matched up. There was no partial match, there was no kind of a match, there was no inkling, just nothing. It was all negative results from the DNA that was found in our clothes. Even a year after the murder, they were still at square one. They DNA tested Bill Crabtree, the man who had found Shauna. They DNA tested to see if they could catch him in a lie about finding Shauna's body. Like, was he trying to lead the police away from him because he was the one who found the body and stuff? Was he trying to do something? Plus, he had a red car. But then again, the DNA test came back negative, and they searched the red car. Car came back clean. Eventually, they turned their sights on a man in town named Ted Walker, after a witness actually phoned in a tip about him. He worked in a pizza shop that Shauna visited with her friends, so he knew Shauna, and he would always try to hug the girls when they ordered their pizza, and they would always run off just because of how creepy he was. And he was described as a tall, thin man. He really was. He was a tall, thin man. He matched the description of the man that was seen following the car and grabbing her the night that she was kidnapped. He also had a small red car.
Obviously, it wasn't him, though, considering this would be a really short episode, if that's who it was.
They did match his DNA, and it came back not a match. Another guy they ended up looking at was Mike Pruitt. Mike had left town shortly after Shauna's body was found, and nobody knew why. When the police searched the house, they did find a small cubby hole that looked like a place to store a little girl. However, when they got his DNA eventually, it came back negative as well.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things here.
A lot of creepy people in this town. A lot of creepy people in this town.
Well, I have a theory about small towns versus cities and the ratio of creepy people. You know, if you have 100 people, 50% seems like more than, 50% of 500 people. So stand out more. I'm curious, though, if they, they're really hot about this tip they got from the neighbor, but he was the only one who saw anything.
So they actually eventually cleared him as well. So
okay, I was curious.
They cleared him in the beginning. They cleared him way in the beginning. He wasn't even a suspect at the time because of how detailed everything was. He didn't just say, "Oh, it was some car that drove up and everything." He said, "No, it was a tall, thin man walking behind this girl who matched the description of the girl that you're looking for." He grabbed her, passed her off into the car, and the car sped off. I think I got the license plate, but the license plate didn't pan out because, again, it was dark and it took him forever to find a phone. But they ended up,
if he was the one who did it, called in a false tip.
Clear him. But they did clear him early in the beginning of the case.
The other thing that comes to mind, and again, it's terrible and awful, and it's really awful when we do cases that involve children. But somebody could have kidnapped her because they had somebody that was paying to spend some time with the little girl.
Nope. That's a good theory, but nope.
Yeah. But I was just saying, it could have been somebody that snagged her, but that's why his DNA evidence wouldn't be on her. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's a good theory, but unfortunately it was not like that. But eventually the leads stop, and it's now July 30th, 1995. It's almost 3 years after Shauna was murdered, and Robert Wenner, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, he was one of the police officers that had worked Shauna's case. So he was very familiar with it. Almost every police officer in that town was familiar with Shauna's case. So they were always looking at it, making sure. He ended up getting a call. Someone tried to abduct a girl in town again.
You say tried to, so I'm assuming she was able to get away or it was stopped or something.
Your assumption is correct. Wenner said that when he talked to the girl, she said, quote, "I knew that if they put me in the car, I was going to die. So I fought like hell to get out of there," unquote. And though she was a victim herself, the police finally had two names that they can start looking at. Jimmy and Timmy O'Brien. Those names. So these two brothers were violent sexual predators. Okay. The police in Oil City were very well known with them and what they could do with their victims. However, as far as they knew, the kidnapping of this girl was their first one that they had tried to do. But it wasn't the kidnapping that actually made them look at the brothers for the Shauna's case. It was the fact that the second girl that they had grabbed was on the exact same route that Shauna walked when she was kidnapped. She was almost taken in the exact same spot.
Oh, that's not suspicious. Not weird at all.
So police went and arrested Jimmy for attempted kidnapping. Officer Wenner asked if anybody had looked at them when Shauna was killed. And they said yeah, but both boys were in jail the night that she was killed.
So another dead end? But man, these guys just seemed like they were the ones that did it.
And that's what the police thought. But because they were in jail the night it happened, there was actually no way it could have been them unless, they had doppelgangers. So on the 5-year anniversary of Shauna's death, so they actually ended up arresting the brothers for this kidnapping charge and everything and putting them away. On the 5-year anniversary of Shauna's death, the Oil City police actually got a call that made their blood run cold. Another 5-year-old girl, Shanae Freeman, had been reported missing from her apartment complex. No one knew if this was the same person that had taken Shauna, and this was like on the anniversary of the day Shauna went missing. So this was 5 years later on the anniversary.
Sure,
Okay.
it's Halloween, so easier to abduct kids.
It's the 27th. It's the 27th and stuff. So it was 5 years later. And so they didn't know if this was the person who had taken Shauna. They didn't know if it was somebody else, but they literally sprung into action. Like as soon as they got the call, they were at this woman's house. Shauna's parents actually went over to Shanae's parents' house and was with them and stuff like that, because even though they didn't know for sure if this is the same person who had taken Shauna, they still wanted to be with somebody who had lost their child. The police started looking at whoever was helping with the searches because they didn't have any actual witnesses to this kidnapping. All they had was the mom calling and saying that her daughter was gone. Offenders like this tend to insert themselves into the case. They help with the search parties. They help comforting the family. They just basically put themselves in the middle to find out what police know. Some detectives actually saw a man who didn't look right hugging the mom of Shanae. One of the officers eventually went up to him and learned who he was. His name was Nick Bowen. And when they started talking to him, Nick was a little bit standoffish, but eventually they were able to talk to him, and Nick actually gave up what he had done to Shanae, and he led them to the shallow grave that they had buried her body
in. Did he confess to Shauna's murder as well?
No. Police figured it out even before the DNA came back negative for Nick, that he didn't kill Shauna. Nick was only 17 when Shanae went missing, meaning he would have had to have been about 12 when Shauna died. And though violent offenders who are children do happen, they are very rare. And especially if Nick had given up the fact that he killed Shanae that quickly, he wouldn't have been able to keep quiet about Shauna's death for 5 years. Like there's just no way. So they were able to help this other family, but Shauna's family still had no answers. The lead detective, Charles Daly, actually ended up retiring from the police force, but he still tried to follow up and help out. But at this point, they didn't have anything that they needed to continue. They needed a name and somebody who matched the DNA. In January of 1998, 6 years after Shauna's murder, Detective Rich Graham actually ended up taking over Shauna's case. Lucy said that he had shown up at the house, sat down with her, and promised that he was going to solve her daughter's case. Like she said, he wasn't saying, oh, we're going to try to. He said, I'm going to solve Shauna's murder. And he would actually look, and for years, he would work his normal caseload during the day, and at night he would sit down and go over Shauna's case over and over and over again. And it was cute because in the video, in the cold case episode, he was talking about it, and he goes, I'm a slow reader, and his wife in the background goes, he's dyslexic. And he's like, I'm a slow reader. I thought that was kind of funny and stuff. But he had mentioned, because the reason why he did it, because, he would work all these cases during the day and come home. And even his wife said so. She was like, he would go to work and then come home, and I would go into his office, and he'd have everything from Shauna's case spread out on his desk, rereading papers that he had already read. And he said that he would do it because, you'd reread something and it would be like maybe you missed a way a word was said or a phrase had put or a piece of evidence that was found or something. Mm-hmm. And so that's why he did it. And he, like I said, he did this for years.
I can understand that. It's kind of like rereading a paper you've written. You may see a mistake you didn't catch before. I work, one of the things I do, I guess, I write for a local magazine. And so I'll write the article, I'll walk away, I'll come back and reread it because I've missed so much stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you sit there and you're like, oh, wait, I should have caught that. So by doing this, Rich actually ended up finding something. In one of the autopsy photos of Shauna, he noticed what looked to be a partial shoe print on Shauna's cheek that actually wasn't mentioned in the autopsy report. So it definitely could have been something that was missed by the original medical examiner. Does happen. It's not like they did it on purpose, but it does happen. So going to a friend of his who was a medical examiner as well, Rich's friend confirmed that it was a shoe print on her cheek. And looking over the photos, it indicated a very violent rape. The other thing he noticed was that whoever kept Shauna had her secluded for days, but there was no evidence of any kind of restraint on her body.
I mean, something that should have been there if it had only been one person.
Bingo. And then it was when Rich realized that there was a good possibility that there was more than one person involved. However, only one of these people would match the DNA evidence.
Honestly, that's a really good reason on why they never thought it was more than one person. But, like I was talking about before, could have been a two-person job. But you would think there'd be different sets of DNA on the bodysuit if it was two people involved.
Basically, once police realized that there was possibly more than one person involved, they end up kind of looking back at all the different departments to see if anything stood out around the time Shauna's death. And they found something. In 1992, the fire department responded to a vehicle that was on fire. The vehicle was a red car. And can you guess who that red car belonged to?
Ted Walker?
Yup. Walker, again, fit the description of what they were looking for perfectly. He knew Shauna. He basically let his house become a flop house to neighborhood kids. Knew a lot of shady people. Fit the description of the man that had been following Shauna the night she was kidnapped. Though he was interviewed several times, he always said, "Oh, I have nothing to hide," and he was honest with detectives. However, when they brought him in again, they finally asked him, "How did he find out about Shauna's disappearance?" And he goes, "The O'Brien brothers told me. They came over to my house and said a little girl was kidnapped downtown."
I mean, okay, but really? Those names? He could have made up a name or said that he heard it around town, but he gave the names of men that could have been connected.
And that were supposedly in jail that night.
Uh-huh.
And that's when Rich had asked Detective Daly, Charles, if they had looked into the brothers. To which Charles replies, "Yeah, but they were in jail at the time." However, Rich had actually never seen a report anywhere saying that the men were in jail. After some digging, he ended up reaching out to a correctional officer and found out that the men had been in jail, but they were bonded out a few nights before Shauna vanished.
And nobody thought to check this out 10 years before.
Honestly, I really think it's because nobody thought to. They probably saw a report saying that they were in jail and left it at that because they didn't have time to dig because they were already going against the clock. And then once that second girl got kidnapped, because that's when they looked when the second girl was attempted at abduction and stuff. So they probably just, checked the jail rosters and noticed like, hey, they were supposed to be in. But at the same time, it was probably a mistake on the jail rosters thing because they had put on the jail rosters that they were in jail the night that they were in custody. So I don't think them being bonded out was written anywhere that it was like wholly known to a different police department and stuff. But especially in the 90s, like you got to remember, like this is the early 90s. It's not like they had the computer systems and stuff back then. Everything I believe was still handwritten probably. So Rich ends up going and interviewing Tim O'Brien, who was in jail at the time for another charge. Surprise there. He actually asked Tim about Shauna's case and asked for a DNA sample. Tim ended up kind of hesitating before he said that he would talk to his lawyer, but they eventually got the sample.
I mean, he was in jail, so...
Yeah.
Did it come back a match?
Yes, but not to Tim. It came back a match to his brother, Jim. Shortly after, police ended up arresting Tim Walker as an accessory and brought him in as well. To this day, Jim and Tim O'Brien have actually never spoken about the case. They refuse to.
So then how did police find out what happened?
Tim Walker ended up singing like a frickin' canary. That's what happened. So he told them everything that he knew. The night that Shauna was kidnapped, he approached her asking if she was selling Girl Scout cookies to make her kind of feel at ease. When she let her guard down, he grabbed her as the O'Briens came around the corner in the car and Walker had handed her off to Tim O'Brien, who then threw Shauna in the car and they sped off. Walker got back to his house with the brothers following shortly behind. Once they had entered, they took Shauna upstairs and Walker could actually hear her yelling as they figured out how to keep her quiet. According to him, it was supposed to be a break. It was supposed to be like a prank. From there, Rich was actually able to piece together what happened to Shauna without any of the brothers saying anything. He believes that they assaulted her in the room upstairs, then left that night, took her to Coulter's hold, where they took her clothes off and dumped them, and then kind of locked her in the trunk of the car, and then assaulted her repeatedly in the car and around in the surrounding areas. Something that explains the rug burn on her knees, as it could have come from the upholstery inside the trunk. Eventually they realized, they had to get rid of her. She'd seen their face, and that's when they had pushed her from the side of the trestle.
I mean, but the brothers still haven't spoken about it, so this is all just speculation after they left Walker's house on what happened.
Exactly, but the DNA evidence and prior history was actually enough of a jury to convict the brothers. 13 years after Shauna Howe was murdered, Tim Walker was convicted of kidnapping and third-degree murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Jim and Tim O'Brien were found guilty of kidnapping and murder and were sentenced to life without parole. To this day, the brothers' mom actually says that they have the wrong men that were convicted and her boys are innocent, but you really can't deny DNA. It's one thing, if it was a fingerprint, because,
Right. Well, but
you really can't deny seminal DNA. It wasn't just, it's your semen, dude.
Right.
That's definitely you. But, and I found multiple articles on this, to this day, she's still oh, these boys are innocent. You guys have the wrong men. And it's okay, well, if you have the wrong men, then who do you think did it? And obviously there was more than enough evidence for the jury to convict them. But at the same time, we have seen convictions happen with less evidence. But at the same time, they have your seminal DNA.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the last case, we really talked a lot about the DNA stuff, with the West Memphis 3,
it varies. It really does. And honestly, the fact and plus it's not even that, it's the fact that they have that third person saying oh, hey, these guys helped me kidnap this girl. They were upstairs in my house with her and then they left with her. It's kind of piecing two and two together. If they didn't do it, then it's kind of making them look really bad. Why? And then why would he yeah. And he could have said anybody's name. He could have given a fake name, but no, he's saying a canary. I watched the interview and he was just yeah, here it is. Here's what happened. Here's my part in this. Here's their part in this. And I'm sitting here dang, dude.
There's a lot of detail.
Yeah, don't let anybody commit a crime with you. Holy crap. God.
Clearly that's not happening.
Wouldn't want you with me when I rob a bank. Shoot. You know how you have those people that you would be with you if you robbed a bank and stuff, because that they keep their mouth shut, and then you have those people that you just wouldn't say anything to, because the second a cop looks at them wrong, they're just gonna sing everything I know who did it. Yeah, that's Tim Walker. He is the guy that you should not have taken with you. No.
But he had the red car.
Right. But then here's there's just so much. And it's really interesting to see cases from the 90s and the early 2000s and stuff, especially before especially with cases like this where, before the DNA, because, they probably, because with how violent the brothers were, especially nowadays, their DNA would have already been in the system nowadays. Right. So they could have run the DNA through anything and just found a hit immediately. And so it's interesting how it didn't, but it was 13 years, which in my book was too long, but they were eventually able to do it. Shauna actually would have been 39 years old this year, and not a day goes by that Lucy doesn't think about her daughter and what could have been. If she, in an interview, she actually quotes, she goes, I think of Shauna every day. I miss her every day, but I'm finally at the point where I can say, Shauna, I love you, and I can go on without my day. I know that she's no longer hurting, and I know that she's no longer in pain. And after 13 years, she is finally able to lay her daughter's murder to rest.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Chill. For more information, including case notes, photos, and sources, visit our website at truecrimeandchill.com. You can also stay connected with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Look for new episodes from us each week on Tuesdays.